You're standing in the kitchen with the fridge door open, cold air on your face, the light on, and in front of you are the same 6 things that were in there 40 minutes ago, arranged in the same way, because nobody has been in the house since. You look at them anyway, you take a moment. You examine the situation with what appears from the outside to be real consideration. Then you close the door and walk away with nothing. You were not hungry when you opened it. You're not hungry now. Nothing has changed in any direction. And in about half an hour, there is a reasonable chance you will do it again. Everyone does this. It is one of the most common behaviors in domestic life, and one of the least examined, mostly because it looks like it must be about food, and food seems like a boring explanation. I want to argue that it has almost nothing to do with food, and that the giveaway is sitting right there in the most common outcome. You take nothing. If this were hunger, you would eat. If this were even craving, you would eat. The signature move of the fridge check is opening it, looking, and leaving. So if you're not there for food, what are you there for? There is a finding about what your mind is doing at the exact moment you walk into that kitchen, and it explains something specific and slightly unsettling, which is why so many people arrive at the fridge with no memory of having decided to go there. I will come back to it, because it changes what this behavior actually is. Start with the evidence that food is not the driver, because it is stronger than people expect. Consider what a genuine search looks like. If you have lost your keys, you look in places you have not already looked. You do not check the same drawer 4 times in an hour, because you have information about that drawer. You have complete information about your fridge. You know what is in it. You put most of it there. You looked 40 minutes ago. There is no new data available. And yet the checking continues, and it continues in a way that survives repeatedly finding nothing. A behavior that keeps running while producing no result is doing something other than what it appears to be doing. That is the thing worth explaining. The best account we have comes from a set of studies that had nothing to do with fridges at all. In 2002, Wendy Wood, Jeffrey Quinn, and Deborah Kashey published a paper in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology on how much of ordinary life is habit. Their method was direct. They gave people programmed wristwatches that buzzed once every hour, and every time it buzzed, the person wrote down what they were doing, where they were, and whether they usually did that thing in that place. Across 2 diary studies, between 35 and 43% of everything people reported was classified as habit, meaning they did it nearly every day and usually in the same location. A later study using a broader age range put the figure at around 47%. Roughly half of what you do today you will do because of where you are standing. That is the important part, and it gets skipped in most retellings. A habit is not simply something you do often. A habit is a response that has been repeated in a stable context until the context itself starts triggering it. The cue is not a decision. The cue is a place, a time, an object, a sequence. You have opened that fridge thousands of times while standing in that kitchen. The kitchen has become the trigger. Walk into it with nothing particular to do, and the routine fires, now the finding I promised. The researchers did not only record what people were doing, they also recorded what people were thinking while they did it. When participants were engaged in habitual behavior, their thoughts were about things unrelated to what they were doing. When they were engaged in non-habitual behavior, their thoughts matched the task in front of them. The interpretation is straightforward and slightly eerie. During habitual action, your attention is not needed, so it goes elsewhere. The behavior runs without supervision, which means that when you arrive at the fridge with no idea why you're there, you're not being forgetful. You are experiencing the correct and expected output of a system that was never routed through your attention in the first place. There was no moment of deciding. That is why there is no memory of deciding. Your mind was working on something else entirely, while your body performed a routine the kitchen had triggered. There is a second mechanism layered on top of this, and it explains the specific blankness of standing there with the door open. In 2006, Gabriel Radvansky and David Copeland ran a set of experiments at Notre Dame that produced one of the more memorable findings in cognitive psychology. They had people carry objects around while performing memory tasks, sometimes moving the same distance within a single room, and sometimes walking through a doorway into another room. People forgot more after passing through a doorway. The distance traveled was the same. The effort was the same. The only difference was the threshold, and crossing it measurably damaged their access to what they had been holding in mind. The explanation is that your brain organizes experience into events rather than as one continuous stream, and a doorway acts as a boundary between events. Cross it, and the previous segment gets filed, which makes retrieving anything from inside it harder. Now walk yourself into the kitchen. Whatever you were thinking about in the other room got compartmentalized the moment you passed through the door. If you had a reason for going, that reason was in the previous event, and it is now filed. What you're left with is a body and a kitchen, a familiar context, and a routine that context reliably triggers. You open the fridge because the kitchen said to, and you have no reason available, because your reason, if you ever had one, is on the other side of the doorway. So we have a context-triggered habit, running unsupervised in a room that also happens to erase the intention that brought you into it. That accounts for the automaticity. It does not yet explain why the fridge specifically rather than the cupboard or the drawer. I want to be careful here, because what follows is my framing rather than a finding, and I would rather flag that than have it sound more official than it is. The fridge has an unusual property among the objects in your home. Almost everything you own is static. The books do not rearrange themselves. The cupboard contains what it contained yesterday. Open any container in your house and you can predict the contents with near certainty. The fridge is the one opaque container whose contents genuinely change. Other people put things in it. Things get eaten out of it. Deliveries arrive. Leftovers appear. Things go off and get thrown out. It is, in a very literal sense, the only object in your home with a state that updates without your involvement, which makes it functionally something to check. You already know the shape of this behavior because you do it with your phone. A thing that sometimes contains something new, checked repeatedly, mostly yielding nothing, and checked again anyway. The fridge is the analog version, and it has been in kitchens a great deal longer. There is one more layer, and it is probably the most honest one. A large proportion of fridge checks happen during work, study, or any task you would rather not be doing right now. You cannot easily stand up mid-task and simply do nothing. That reads as giving up, both to anyone watching and to yourself. But you can go and look in the fridge. It is brief, it is physical, it looks like a legitimate errand, and it requires no justification whatsoever. The fridge check is the socially acceptable form of stopping. That is why it clusters so heavily around difficult paragraphs, awkward emails, and revision sessions. The fridge is not what you wanted. You wanted 3 minutes of not being in the previous room, and the fridge provided a reason to leave it. So what do you do with any of this? Mostly nothing, and I want to say that clearly, this is not a problem in need of a solution. Opening a fridge, looking, and closing it costs you a few seconds and a negligible amount of electricity. There's a whole genre of content that would take this behavior and turn it into evidence that you lack discipline, and that framing is both unpleasant and inaccurate. What you're doing is running an ordinary context-triggered habit, which is the same mechanism that gets you dressed in the morning without deliberating about it. If it does bother you, the useful thing to know is that the leverage is in the cue rather than in the willpower. Habits fire from context. So the interventions that work are contextual. Working in a room that is not adjacent to the kitchen removes the trigger entirely. Taking your break somewhere specific, rather than defaulting to the kitchen, gives the interruption a different destination. Neither of those requires resisting anything, which is why they tend to work better than deciding to have more self-control. And if the fridge is genuinely doing something for you, which for many people it is, the honest version is to let it. A 3-minute break in the middle of a hard task is not a failure of character. One brief thing said gently, and then I will finish. For most people, this is a mildly comic habit and nothing more. For some people, going to the fridge is bound up with feeling upset rather than feeling bored, and if that is closer to your experience, and if it is causing you distress, that is worth talking to a doctor or another professional about. Not because there's anything wrong with you, and not because the habit itself is the issue, but because something that is carrying an emotional load is a different situation from something that is simply automatic, and it deserves better support than a video can give. Here is the reframe worth carrying out of this. You have been treating those trips as a small failure of self-knowledge. You went somewhere. You do not know why. You found nothing. You came back. What actually happened is that a room you have trained for years fired a routine you never authorized, after a doorway quietly filed away whatever reason you might have had, in service of a brief interruption you genuinely wanted. You were never looking for food. You were checking whether anything had changed in the only place in your home where anything might have, and almost nothing ever has, which is precisely why you will need to check again. That is the cue most people miss. If you have ever opened the fridge, looked at it, and closed it with nothing, leave a comment and tell me what you were supposed to be doing at the time. Subscribe to Psychology Q, and I will keep showing you the signals hiding in plain sight.